Okay, so I just wanted to move on to a study that was done by an academic called Fiona Wilkie. It was a really interesting academic study that was done for her PhD, where she actually researched and found about 60 companies in the UK that were defining themselves as site-specific, and her research attempted to put a survey out to each one of these companies to invite them to reflect on why they thought their work was site-specific. Unsurprisingly, the results were quite varied, so different companies had different reasons as to why they thought their work constituted a site-specificity. And I wanted to talk about a particular a particular moment where Fiona Wilkie draws on a company called Wrights and Sites, who are a group of academic researchers / theatre makers, and their attempts to try and pick apart this term site-specific and try and maybe create a diagram or a scale of site-specificity. The Fiona Wilkie study, by the way, is called Mapping the Terrain, a Survey of Site-Specific Performance in Britain, and you can find PDF copies of that study on Google. I'm pretty sure you can access it via the Saboleth sort of thing. So I wanted to talk about this classification that Wrights and Sites made. Now they suggested 5 different sort of areas on this scale of from not site-specific to site-specific. This scale included in the theatre building, so work made in a municipal theatre building. Then it was theatre made outside a theatre building. Now this could be like Shakespeare in the Park or theatre made for amphitheatres. There's plenty of outdoor theatres. There's one in Kelvin Grove Park, there's one in Princes Street Gardens. There's plenty of outdoor amphitheatres. So for Wrights and Sites, they said it starts, the bottom of the scale is theatre inside, produced inside a municipal theatre building, theatre made for these outdoor amphitheatres. Then site sympathetic, and that is when you take an existing performance text and place that in a particular location because it seems to fit. So the sympathetic aspect of it is actually it would make sense to do this play about, say it's about a news corporation, well perhaps it makes sense to do it in the news offices, and that would be site sympathetic from their perspective. Or a play, for example, like Midsummer by David Gregg with music by Gordon McIntyre. This play is entirely set in Edinburgh city centre, and it draws on scenes like Arthur's Seat and Princes Street and things like that. So perhaps if you were to take this play and do a tour and perhaps mould that might be site sympathetic, taking existing performance text and putting it in a location that it seems suited to. Next is site generic, and that's performance created for a series of like sites. In other words, you're not making a performance for that swimming pool or that car park. You're making a performance for car parks or for swimming pools, which can then be transported to different swimming pools or different locations, which have the same sort of function, if you like, the same usage, and that to Wrights and Sites is site generic. Lastly, they say that there is site-specific performance. So you've got in the theatre building, outside the theatre, site sympathetic, site generic, and that's all before you reach site-specific. Now, their definition of site-specific is that it's performance specifically generated from or for one selected site. So they put a sort of numerical aspect onto it as well. It's about that location in particular. And they say that the layers of the site are revealed through reference to, and this could be multiple different things, one or multiple of these. So historical documentation, the site usage, past and present, found text and objects, or actions, sounds, anecdotal guidance, personal association, and half-truths and lies. So these are the sorts of different things that you might draw on at that one particular site in order for that work to be site specific, if you like, according to Wrights and Sites anyway. And Fiona Wilkie sort of draws on this scale of performance, and she also highlights though that this is also quite problematic, because of course the moment you start to make categories like that, you start to say, well, okay, so certain things don't constitute site specificity. What about the performances that happen that fall in between these terms? So I've already discussed 784's Cheevy the Stag and the Black Oil, which they toured. It was an existing performance text which they toured to particular locations all up in the Highlands and in the East, and specifically not for municipal theatres but in town halls and different places. And they moulded each text in order to fit their particular audience. So they didn't just do the same text for each one. They knew that if they were going to Banff, it would be different than if they were doing it in Stornoway. They changed it to adapt. But yet it's still the same show with the same kind of meanings that they're trying to convey to people, which tours. And they have an existing sort of set which they can fold down and fold back up again in each location, and that doesn't seem to fit a category. And of course there's many of these things now that's the problem, or what Mike Pearson calls the folly of categorisation, because the moment you start to try and place them into boxes and pigeonhole them and say that work isn't site specific and that work's site generic or whatever, you start to say, well, what about site responsive, site sensitive, site reactive? You could keep categorising, synthesising it down until actually there's no point in having a fixed definition, because every performance is different and every performance could have its own definition because it relates in some way or another to a particular place. The other problem that I have with creating a scale like that is that it produces a hierarchy. It says work that seems to draw on the socio-political relationship of a site, as well as its form and function and all the rest of it, is a pure site specificity. And whereas if you're just selecting a site because you like its particular form, then that's just kind of half site specificity. And I don't think it's really worth doing that. I mean, I don't know what the purpose of doing that is. What we should try and avoid to do is when you go and watch site-specific work, or what you might call place-sensitive, if you're trying to avoid definitions altogether, is end up sitting after the show with your friends discussing whether or not it's site-specific. You should be trying to assess the show on what its relationship to the site is. How does it make you think about site differently? What did it bring out that you didn't notice before? These sorts of questions. You shouldn't really be spending an awful long time thinking, is it site specific or is it site generic, sites, whatever. I just think it sort of gets away from the core point of what that type of work is trying to do and the kinds of questions, real questions, that you should be asking of it. So, and I don't like that hierarchy, because I think that you could be choosing it for particular reasons, one way or the other. Okay. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on the term site-specific, and sort of throw my tuppence into the equation as to what I think. For me, the term is inadequate. Site-specific. First of all, I would say that you don't need the specific in site-specific, because if we start to address exactly what a site is, we start to realise that the word specific has absolutely no meaning on it whatsoever. Now, the Cambridge Dictionary definition of site is a place where something is, was, or will be built, or where something happened, is happening, or will happen. So that's quite broad. But if we try and narrow it down and look at some of the existing usage of the word site, it usually pertains to when you have a group of people or one person with a particular set of skills with particular materials who select a location to do something in, to build something, to make something, to do something in. If we think, for example, the most common usage of the term site would be a building site or construction site, whereby you have a group of people with a particular set of skills, builders, joiners, fitters, who arrive at that particular place with their tools and materials, and it's that intention to work in that place, to construct and build something, that turns a place into a site. It's the intention that makes it a site. So you're specifically going to that place in order to do something, and that interaction turns a place into a site. That's what my idea is. Anyway, and there's this crops up. There's also sites of excavation. So excavation sites, like if you're an archaeologist and you find and you're on a dig, you would go to that location. It's a group of people with a particular set of skills who have tools and materials, who go there to try and, instead of building, they're digging away in order to find something, in order to do something. And it's that intention which turns it into an excavation site. It's the delineation, the cordoning off of a particular place in order to do something which makes it a site. There's also things like a forensic site, a site of investigation. If you're a detective and there's been a murder and you're trying to discover what happens, again, people with particular set of skills, tools, materials that go there to try and figure something out or do something. So for my part, when I look at what that word means, site, to me it's about that amalgamation of things, and it's site signals intent of people to do something somewhere. I know that's quite broad, but it's open, and it actually kind of encompasses what theatre makers are trying to do. Theatre makers have particular skills which they've gained through training at university or at theatre school or whatever, and they're selecting a particular place in order to take those skills, and they have materials in order to create something. And so they turn these places into sites of performance. And I think that's really what all of the work that might come under the site-specific banner is trying to do. Perhaps a better definition of site-specific or an explanation of site-specific performance might just be sited performance. You know, performance work which is sited somewhere, and it is more to do with the fact that it has been specifically chosen for a reason to do that, and it's just the intent of the performance makers to do it there that turns it into a site. And this also encompasses municipal theatres, because you might say, actually, I'm going to do a show in the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow, but I want to do it specifically at the Citizens because I want to make a show about the citizens, and therefore that intention turns a place of theatre into a site of theatre. It's people going there to make that work. That's my understanding of it anyway. I mean, that's how I feel about it, and I know it's broad and you know, it maybe has its own problems to deal with, but I think it's at least open enough that it can encapsulate pretty much all these different avenues feeding into its cited performance. So Mike Pearson in Site-Specific Performance, that book that I keep referring to, because it is the best textbook for talking about this stuff, he asserts that there are new kinds of site more or less stable within and through which performance might be enacted, and new kinds of performative relationship within and through which site might temporarily materialise, you know what I mean? So in other words, he's saying that a site is something which is constructed and defined by the actions of the people that choose them. Do you see what I mean? I don't know. So it's specifically, we're going to turn places into sites by going there and making performance work. So that's my tuppence into the mix as to what I would suggest would be a better term, would be sited performance. So I hope that helps.